Hey there, everybody. Coach Mark here, and today we're going to be talking about triphasic training and how to apply it to the strongman athlete. So, the core thesis of triphasic training is training all three types of muscular contraction. Because if you look at force, or in this case, strength, we're going to use that term interchangeably, you've got three different types. There's eccentric, which is decelerating or controlling an external force, such as the descent of a squat. Isometric, which is stopping or controlling external force, such as when a yoke starts to sway on you, that ability to bear down and get it back under control. And then concentric strength, which is simply moving an external load, which most of us are already really familiar with. That's how most programs really tend to focus on, is just your 1 rep max, how much weight you can move. However, that's one of the things that is often limited when it comes to a strongman athlete's development, is not spending the time and energy on improving eccentric and isometric strength. Learning how to absorb and redirect force as a strongman athlete is an essential physical attribute for long-term success. Now, I'm sure you've noticed that red V that I'm using as a graphic here. The V is a simple way of looking at how athletic you are, at least in the terms of your ability to absorb and redirect force. If you have a narrower V, like these two examples right here, you have less time between the eccentric to the concentric phase, which means you can cycle your reps more quickly, and you're also going to generate more power because you've learned how to absorb, control, and redirect that stretch reflex from the previous repetition. Now, I think it's really important that for anyone who really does want to learn more about the triphasic method, you should really read into the work of Cal Dietz on this. It's incredibly valuable. For context, when he designed this program, it was designed around the needs of field athletes. So there are things that we're going to be doing with this specific iteration of it that make it more applicable to strength and power athletes like strongman. And that's really the thesis of good training, is you kind of see what works for other populations, look at the underlying principles, and then apply them accordingly. Hey there, Future Mark here. I forgot to say this at the beginning of the video, but make sure to find me over on Instagram as Coach Mark Estrubio. Also, I offer one-to-one coaching. It's what I do full-time, and the odds are very good. I'd love to work with you. And if that's something you'd like to do, make sure to check out the description box down below to see how you can make that happen, but enjoy the rest of the video. So first and foremost, let's talk about eccentric strength. In general, this is the lowering phase of the lift, which is really undertrained, especially for strongman athletes. Most every movement has an eccentric component to it, such as the descent of a squat, the dip drive of a push press, or even a deadlift after you do rep number 1, because reps 2 and onward, you have to lower the weight. Now, improving your eccentric strength is going to come with a host of benefits, not the least of which is improving your ability to cycle reps for those ultra high rep events, especially on something like a Viking press, learning how to keep it stay in the pocket and not let the implement get away from you, or even yourself getting away from the implement. Additionally, it's going to help you learn how to control and store the stretch reflex. Even with a pause, generally your stretch reflex lasts 2 to 5 seconds. If you don't believe me, look at the bench press as a perfect example. It's a paused lift, yet most every bench presser is going to do more weight with a paused bench press as opposed to a dead press where they start from the bottom up, because there is some stored stretch reflex. Additionally, getting strong eccentrically disinhibits the muscles. If you're not strong in the eccentric, if you're not familiar with it, your body's essentially going to flutter the brakes. But mechanically, we're actually about 20% stronger during the eccentric, so we can milk that and learn how to get stronger and store that stretch reflex and cycle reps, and also just simply get more confident and competent with a load. This really plays out on the deadlift in particular. Now, as far as training to improve your eccentric strength, I love to pair eccentric emphasis work with extended range of motion variations, such as a close grip bench, narrower stance high bar or SSB squat, snatch grip deficit deadlifts, and then either an axle or neutral grip strict press, because you're going to get a lot longer lowering time. This makes the extended eccentric much more viable. Additionally, this only keeps you, 1 or 2 steps away from your primary lift. That way you're going to have that transference. When you change 3 or more variables, it tends to get to a point where there's not as much overload, so the transference to your primary lift becomes a bit questionable. And on screen right now is an example of a 4-week wave you could do to help improve your eccentric strength and control. This is going to seem very light, but remember, you're using generally a 2-step variation from the main lift. Additionally, eccentrics tend to be very fatiguing. You would slot this in place of speed or other technique-focused work. Now, next up would be the isometric phase of a lift. This is the part of a lift where essentially you're preventing the movement of an external load. Now, there's also a type of isometric where you're attempting to move something that's immovable. You'll often see people do that with deadlifts, where they're actually deadlifting into pins and just pulling against them as hard as possible. That's a topic for a different time. However, for this phase, what we want to think about is training the isometric where you're weakest, where you tend to fall apart. That way you're getting stronger in that specific range. So for example, this could be the bottom of a squat, the bottom of a dip drive for a push press, especially on the log, or roughly mid-shin on a deadlift. Now, as far as getting stronger here, I think the benefits are going to be pretty obvious. You're going to improve position where you're weakest. Additionally, longer duration isometrics can be really good for joint health and improving force output long term. Something I really like to do are 30 to 45-second isometric holds on something like a dumbbell hammer curl, for example, if you find your elbows are hurting. They're also going to help with muscular endurance for events such as a Hercules hold or even a farmer's walk, because if you think about it, those events are very isometric in nature, especially for the grip and upper back. And then last but not least, they're going to help you gain and reclaim stability for multiple reps. Let's say, for example, you're doing a yoke walk, which is multiple steps. If you find it's getting away from you, having that isometric strength, that ability to bear down on the yoke is going to help you lock it into place. That sort of anaconda crushing strength that doesn't necessarily move the implement, but keeps it from moving without you wanting it to move. Now, as far as implementing isometric work in your training, it's very simple, but I do like to pair pause work with variations that have you moving through an extended range of motion, especially where you're weakest, as well as ones that force more control. So for example, for the power lifter, this would be a Larson bench press, camber bar squats, a deficit deadlift, or a push press with a pause at the bottom of the dip drive. Just like in the eccentric phase, you want to keep this to 1 to 2 key movements throughout the session because these can be very exhausting over time, especially if you are a stronger lifter. And here's a basic 4-week isometric phase you could use. Again, you would slot this in place of your speed work or other technique focused work. I personally would run this immediately after the 4-week eccentric phase. The volume here is actually a bit lower than the eccentric phase, as I honestly find pauses are a bit more draining than controlled eccentrics, but your mileage may vary. And then last but not least is the concentric phase. We're already very familiar with this. If you're watching the channel, you've learned to train for concentric strength already, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. But what I will say is after 8 weeks where you do first the eccentric, then the isometric phase, you're going to be in a great spot to really start pushing a higher peak on the primary variation because you spent a lot of time improving your positioning and overall ability with the movement. Alternatively, what you could consider doing is running 3 weeks eccentric, 3 weeks isometric, and then 2 weeks concentric emphasis to help make for a nice 8-week developmental cycle. And on screen is what that developmental cycle might look like. So again, you can see what we're doing here is we're improving eccentric, isometric, and then concentric strength. And on weeks 7 and 8, I like to do it with either a speed emphasis or adding in a plyometric superset if possible. So for example, if you were doing deadlifts for this, these first weeks here, snatch grip deficit deads, then we move into pause deads. Then you would do a regular dead where you might superset this with a box jump, for example, and you're going to be feeling really good. You're going to feel really locked in. This would be a great block to run if you are in the off season and just needing to sort of reset your deadlift after a long, heavy peaking cycle. So ultimately, what it comes right down to is triphasic training is a great option for the strongman athlete because not only does it get us stronger on the specific implement, but it's actually going to help us develop relevant physical attributes and just create a more better all-around athlete because we're not just getting stronger with, say, the deadlift, but we're also learning how to control a load, we're learning how to stop a load, create and stop acceleration when we don't want it. Again, when it comes to strongman athletes, we're both strength and field athletes, so we want to think about more than simply moving weight mindlessly, and triphasic slots in really nicely there. This is one I like to run in the off season, or you could even run it as part of a peaking cycle for a lower priority movement. So for example, if you are peaking for something like a log press, a triphasic block for something like your incline slots in really nicely because it's going to help develop a lot of the same musculature, but it's going to be done at a lower intensity, so it's not going to beat your joints up as much. But that wraps up today's video. Pretty quick and simple one here. And again, I like triphasic as a sort of developmental wave. It can be used for max effort, but that's a topic for a different time. If you want to see that breakdown, let me know down in the comments below. If you have any comments or questions, you know where to find me. Otherwise, I'll see you folks in the next video. Take care, everyone.